Oh, yes. Welcome once again to Center Stage. My name is Mark Gordon. Joining us now on the program to talk about We Are Legion, the story of hacktivists. We have Brian Knappenberger, and he is the writer, producer, and director of this wonderful documentary that takes us inside the world of Anonymous, the Guy Fawkes mask-wearing hacktivist collective that has redefined civil disobedience for the digital age and has been credited with attacks on the FBI, the Motion Picture Associates of America. It also explores the historical roots of early hacktivist groups and follows Anonymous from an internet chat board to a full-blown global movement that Time magazine named one of the most influential groups of people in the world.
That's right.
Wow. It's pretty crazy.
It is crazy. It's a crazy story.
How did you get involved with this story? What was it about We Are Legion that really compelled you to make this film?
Well, I had first become aware of Anonymous in 2008 when they conducted protests against the Church of Scientology. And this was striking, and it was a kind of moment of innovation because I don't think the internet had ever been used to call people into the streets in the kinds of numbers that we saw when that happened. And it was a strange, bizarre kind of scene. Here was a church created by a science fiction author being protested by people wearing masks created by a science fiction author. So I became curious as to where did this group come from? What did they want? And so I followed them a little bit then, and then Anonymous roared into action again in December of 2010 when MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal cut off financial services to WikiLeaks. This was a moment of outrage for the group, and they decided to attack those three companies, MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal, and to shut them down with denial of service attacks. And so that's when it became pretty clear that this group was changing and evolving in really interesting ways. And so basically, the film, we set out to kind of chart that progress, and it's been a heck of a year and a half of activity.
Were you ever concerned that getting involved with this project, if they found out about you, and if they didn't want to be exposed in this fashion, that they might come after you, or did they?
No, they haven't, and I don't. And I guess people have asked me that quite a bit, and my answer is always that I think that they're a very significant movement. I think that they're very important, one of the most important, in fact, phenomenons of our time. It's not often that something entirely new comes along, but I do think this qualifies Anonymous as a culture. And I think when you, as a documentary filmmaker, you approach these subjects, you don't approach them with fear. You just approach them and try to tell the story as accurately as you can. And I feel like that's what we've done.
Tell me about white hats and black hats.
White hats and black hats white hats and black hats they are terms used to describe different kinds of hackers, largely with different kinds of motivations. This goes back a long time before Anonymous. White hats are largely... Let's start with black hats. Black hats are the guys that break into systems, and they're usually, the end goal is usually money. Right? That's usually the point. They want to break in, they want to steal credit card information, they want to steal something, and they want to get out, and they don't want to tell anybody about it because they want those vulnerabilities to continue to remain open so they can steal more stuff, essentially. White hats generally are thought of, and these terms are often, I should say, debated heavily in the hacker community, whether or not they even exist or whether anybody is purely one thing or the other. But a white hat is generally thought of as somebody that will discover a vulnerability in a system, Microsoft or something, and maybe won't go very far through it, and then will tell the company that there's a vulnerability there, and that they will be able to then fix that vulnerability so the black hats don't get in. As I said, those terms are often debated, and there's new terms that have been brought up, particularly gray hats, which most people say that all hackers are gray hat hackers in some sense. In other words, people that are somewhere on this spectrum between black hat and white hat.
You take us into this very fascinating world of chat rooms. Mm-hmm. Talk about this one chat room, because that's kind of where they feel it evolved There's the chat room, and then there's the B chat room, and
right.
And I like the way he describes it. What's it called? It's called
the B board.
The B board. The
Right.
B board is set up to find
Now
everything
we're in trouble.
that's so offensive that you're never going to want to come back to it, but people are obsessed with it.
Right. Anonymous, it's largely believed that Anonymous basically got its start on a website called 4chan.org, and I highly recommend that your listeners don't go there.
Why is that? Everybody's going there. I was tempted to go there, but I was kind of freaked out.
You don't do it. Just save
4chan.
yourself. Yeah. Essentially, 4chan is a site. It was created by a kid named Chris Moot Pool when he was 15 years old. It was based on a Japanese site I believe it's called 2chan. Formed out of a kind of love for Japanese animation. And, if you go to 4chan.org, there's lots of different sites. I mean, there's actually an origami site, which has pretty interesting pictures of mind-blowing kind of origami. But there's one part of 4chan called the B-board, which is what he created as it's called the random site. So if you click on
because you can go on and you can go on as anonymous. You don't have to.
Yeah.
So you're totally have that anonymity, right?
Right. So the B-board became this place where if anything was too offensive or too out of line or just off point, everybody would say, "Well, take it to B." So B became an anything goes kind of site, and part of the website, and it's freedom of speech and expression taken to its absolute extreme. You'll see things that are disgusting. You'll see things that are thought-provoking. Actually, so some things that are interesting. But one of the attributes of 4chan is that when you sign on, you don't give your name, right? You exist anonymously, and in fact, you're just a string of numbers. And next to the numbers, instead of a name, it says anonymous. So there, at one point, here you have thousands, maybe millions of people contributing to a site that refreshes so quickly, and at one point there was a joke that said, well, what if all of these random posts, all partly disgusting, crude, all of this, what if this was all done by one person named Anonymous? And it kind of looked like that. If from an outsider's perspective, might as well be one guy. So that became a kind of internal joke. And that's essentially where it became the sort of identity of Anonymous was formed, very much in non kind of political sense. It was a culture of pranks, essentially.
What is that? What is the one term that where they follow people and they just prank them? What's that term?
The trolling.
Trolling.
Yes, trolling is a
I love
huge
the whole.
part.
One of my professors, my comm professors, would love this because he's all into that subculture and the language that's used.
Right.
So trolling.
Yeah.
Tell me about trolling.
Trolling is actually a really interesting phenomenon. I mean, essentially, it's just mass pranking of people, but it became something very, very interesting. We follow trolling. There's one really interesting incident that we go over in the film, which is the Habbo Hotel. Habbo Hotel is an online children's game, and members from Anonymous decided they were going to overrun Habbo Hotel and kind of shut it down with sheer numbers and do bizarre things like block people from going to the pool.
Oh yeah, they create little people with afros.
It was great. Exactly. And so they decided nobody was going to use this virtual pool in Habbo Hotel, and this was fun for them. But I think you see, and we try to chart in the film, this kind of evolution where they see, well, maybe we can do something really interesting and disruptive with the kinds of numbers that we have and the kind of culture that's developing.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, but that whole kind of cyber battle with with L. Ron Hubbard and the Scientology.
Yeah, that comes out of 4chan initially. There was leaked a video of Tom Cruise, in which he is talking about the virtues of Scientology, and I'm sure you remember it. It was leaked all over the web, and it became a kind of viral video. And Anonymous passed this around, and what happened was the Church of Scientology issued cease and desist letters to everybody online that they could find that was hosting this video. And Anonymous, seeing that as a kind of restriction of the internet, a restriction of freedom of speech, roared into action and began to protest the Church of Scientology.
You also, in the film, it talks about what they did with Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Where actually some of these, hacktivists, when they actually shut down an entire country so no one could communicate out. They actually went in and figured out a way to get the internet back to the people in Egypt.
Right, exactly. Actually, Mubarak, during those days of the early kind of uprisings in Egypt during the Arab Spring, shut off connection to the internet, shut off the country's connection to the internet, so nobody could communicate. And I think more importantly for him, nobody could communicate outside of the country, get word out about what was happening. So Anonymous and other internet activists, kind of wider internet activist community, including groups like Telecomics, went to work, and this infuriated them as much as any action that had ever been done. This kind of complete shutdown of the internet. And they went to work to try to find ways around that, to try to either turn it back on, find other ISPs, things that ways of turning the internet back on. Also, what they called sort of care packages, where they would take how to deal with things like tear
pepper
gas.
spray.
Yeah. So in other words, they would find ways of how to deal with tear gas. They would translate that into Arabic, and they would try to find ways to electronically disseminate that as far and wide as they could in Egypt during that time. So there was a lot of really interesting activity going on.
Well, you've done a lot of documentaries and feature films and commercials with Sundance Channel and PBS Frontline. Love Frontline.
Yeah, thanks.
How does this one compare? I mean, what is it that this film, We Are Legion, when you look at your body of work, where will this fit in with all that?
Well, I've always been fascinated. A lot of my work involves technology and sort of cutting edge technology, and also human rights and freedom of speech issues. So in a way, this was kind of as a documentary. It just hit on a lot of different things that I had sort of cared about for a long time. It's also an interesting group. It's a marginalized group of people. They're often been called hooligans and criminals, and somebody said once punks and pranksters. But they are punks and pranksters who have found themselves in the middle of one of the most important kind of battles of our time. It's a battle for privacy, a battle for whether it's okay, in what ways are we allowed to protest online, what is the surveillance of the internet and the potential surveillance abuses of the internet. What they're involved in is stuff that is really kind of critical to our lives.
Well, you also follow. There are a couple of people that are being indicted for this hacktivism, and I don't know what the exact quote is. Maybe you can tell me. But one of the girls says that somebody commits this crime and they get a slap on the wrist.
Yeah,
I'm facing like 8 years. What was that?
Well, I think the biggest comparison with what this group did, and the group you're talking about is referred to as the Anonymous 16, right? Which is now currently under indictment for shutting down PayPal during what we talked about, the WikiLeaks kind of dust up. What they're facing right now is 15 years in prison and a $250,000 fine for shutting down traffic to PayPal for what was just a few hours. So the big comparison there is to an actual sit-in. Like if you were to go to a street corner and protest to try to protest a war or something, that's illegal. You would probably get thrown in jail for a night and a $250 fine. So somewhere in the continuum is where if you believe this is illegal activity, not protected First Amendment activity, where should that punishment lie? Where is the correct place for punishment for something like that? And the truth is, we don't know that yet because this is new territory.
Well, I'm looking. You did a piece on Mark Zuckerberg, with Google and Twitter and all that, and there's been issues about privacy with him and with Facebook. Yeah. Actually, the comparison between Anonymous and Facebook is really interesting. There was a kind of what amounted to be almost a hoax of that Anonymous was going to attack Facebook. That turned out to be nothing, although you hear it still quite a bit. Why didn't they attack Facebook? But the truth is, at their heart, Facebook and Anonymous are kind of philosophically different. I think Mark Zuckerberg really
believes that you are the same person in all walks of your life, and that person should be available to the public, that should be a kind of window to the public, that you are the same person in a party, at work, in bed, and that should be that. There's no room for privacy in any of those things, and this is a fairly radical notion in the history of humanity. This isn't how most people live their lives. Anonymous comes from a very, very different kind of philosophical background, right? They make the case for anonymity, and there is a case to be made for anonymity.
I love this. George Segal was in a film called Terminal Man, great movie, where he is anti-technology, and I think he has epilepsy, and they insert a computer chip in his brain. Sci-fi.
Yeah.
But I mean, in some ways, technology is a blessing and a curse, isn't it? Because it becomes like Facebook. First, you don't love it, and then all of a sudden it becomes an addiction.
Right.
It's like people have to. Remember when Facebook was down for a couple hours? People were freaking out,
Yeah.
They can't let someone know that they're at the restaurant down the corner.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think technology is a blessing and a curse at different times. And I think one way of looking at Anonymous is they seem keenly aware of the dark side of technology. They live and breathe in the dark side of technology. They love the internet. They'll be the first to tell you that. But they also seem aware that the same tools that have led to such a incredible kind of evolution in the way we communicate can also be used by powerful forces to try to silence those with whom they disagree. Mm-hmm. So, the same things that make our lives sort of enhance the kind of our lives can also, be used as tools of surveillance, for instance.
Well, it's a great film, and you're at a film festival, right? Oak Fest.
We're at Oakland. We're also at Palo Alto in about a week and a half.
That Oak Fest looks great.
It's going to be great. We actually shot a lot of the film in Oakland during the protests there, during some of the Occupy protests there, which were particularly intense.
Well, best of luck with that, and perhaps the shortlist this year.
Oh, let's hope so.
Yeah, well, and we've been talking with director, writer, and producer Brian Knappenberger. He is the director of We Are Legion, and be on the lookout for it. It's a fascinating look at technology. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, and the address is mark@stageandscreen.com. Also, if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, we send out a weekly newsletter that talks about the films and the filmmakers we have coming up on the show. Just a reminder, you can hear Center Stage live every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on KXLU Los Angeles, 88.9 FM. We're also streaming live on the internet at kxlu.com. Until next time, this is Mark Gordon, and I'll see you Center Stage.